Hello and welcome to the channel, my friends. It's Thunderbob here, and tonight we are going to talk about a franchise that is very close to my heart. Resident Evil. This is a series that has basically been there from my earliest gaming days. A series that has grown with me over the years, reinventing itself with each new release and with each new generation. Of all of the game series I have enjoyed over the decades, Resident Evil has the most impressive release cadence, while also maintaining a very high level of quality, with just a few missteps over the years. I've been playing these games at release for nearly 30 years now, but I've come to realize that while I've replayed a few of the games many times, like Resident Evil 4, there are a few that I've not played since that original release date many years ago, and there are at least 2 mainline games that I never actually completed. So my plan is to replay every mainline release in the series, including all of the numbered titles and the remakes. And I'm going to throw in Code Veronica and Revelations 1 and 2, even though it's debatable if those are mainline games. I'm going to play through the games in release order, and then put together a review and retrospective for each game individually. I intend to contrast my memories and feelings playing these games originally, years and decades ago, against how the games hold up today. I'm going to play through these games on the PC where available, and for the older titles with graphical mods to try to play these in the best possible light today. When I'm done with the entire series, I want to do a final video with my overall thoughts on the series and a ranking of all of the games. And a warning here, there will be some spoilers, but let's go ahead and get started. And tonight we're going to be discussing a true classic, Resident Evil 4. This is by far the Resident Evil game that I've spent the most time with. I have played this game on so many different systems and in so many different ways. And it started with the original GameCube release. I remember I worked at a call center back at the original release. And next door was a mall that had, I can't remember if it was a GameStop or an electronic boutique, but there was a game store there. And on release day, I rushed over and they told me that it did not release until the next day. And I argued with them, and I pointed at this poster that was behind the counter there that said it released on January 11th. But they said that they had not received their shipment yet. And I begrudgingly left, and I returned the next day. And today, I still have my copy and the receipt inside with a January 12th, 2005 date on it. I was out of high school by 2005 and working. I was mostly a PC player at this point. But certain games would still make me return to the consoles. And I had a GameCube that was my primary console back then. I immediately fell in love with Resident Evil 4. I played through it so quickly and it just felt magical. Everything about it seemed perfect. It was one of the best looking games I'd ever played. And, this game practically introduced the third-person shooter formula. It felt like it respected those older games, but it modernized the way they played. And this was something solely needed after the misstep of Resident Evil 0 and Code Veronica in my mind. I think those were some of the kind of failed experiments, kind of an awkward time in the series. And I think 4 really redeveloped the formula. And you can see the DNA in these games today really leans heavily into what they did with Resident Evil 4. Now, over the years, I played this many times. I played the GameCube release a few times. I replayed it when it came out on the Wii with the pointer aiming, which for a long time I actually felt was the best way to play. I played that subpar PC release. More recently, I played through the game on the Quest VR headset, which is actually an amazing experience. And I have a review on the channel actually for that version. And that might be one of the best ways to play the classic Resident Evil 4, not the remake. I've probably played this game about 10 times over the last 20 years. Now, today I'm completing this game using the HD Project mod for the PC, which is just an incredible mod that they released a couple of years ago. A single individual improved nearly every texture in the game, in many cases spending countless hours hunting down original source material for textures or hand creating new ones. And it really makes this game look more modern, though it's still running on a 20-year-old engine. It doesn't quite hold up to the remake in the visual department. It also gives you a ton of customization options to tailor the game to your liking, things like turning off the QTEs if you're not into those. Now, after beating this game, I gotta tell you, this game totally holds up and is still a blast today. This was the game that, in my opinion, went from survival horror to an action horror hybrid. There's still, a need to hoard your resources and balance their use, but you're generally given enough to sustain your journey. The game, however, throws a ton of enemies at you. Most of the time you enter a new area, and it feels a bit like an arena, a big village center of some kind that's full of enemies, and you must clear your way through, search the area for items and treasures, and then move on. It's always pretty clear where you need to head next, and there isn't too much forced backtracking, though the game world does feel pretty large still. Alright, and now let's talk about the structure of the game, and I'm going to skim this a little bit. There is just a huge amount of content in this game. Going to hit the high level points, but we're not going to walk through this game scene by scene. That would be an hour-long video, and I just don't have time for that. So, the game starts out with an introduction explaining that Leon Kennedy has joined a special government task force after the events of Resident Evil 2, and has been assigned a mission to find the president's missing daughter. This leads to an unnamed rural village in Spain where he encounters a group of hostile villagers. This game largely dispenses with the traditional zombie enemy. Instead, you fight ganados, the human victims of a parasite called Las Plagas that controls them. They're slow and sluggish, similar to the zombies of the previous game, but now they're able to utilize weapons and tools and work in a more coordinated manner. The early encounters with these enemies throughout the village is particularly memorable. They attack you for several minutes until a bell rings and calls them away. From here you explore the town, a farm, a church. You take a boat out onto a lake and you fight a giant fish creature. The game brings you back to the village center several times, and it feels kind of like a central hub, though the game is pretty linear overall. You fight a giant monster known as El Gigante. You also meet Louis Serra in this area, a former police officer and researcher, who you work with to escape, but not before Leon is infected with the Las Plagas parasite. You eventually track Ashley to a church, and for most of the game she tags along with you, mostly staying out of the way, but occasionally she gets killed. There's a fun moment where you are trapped in a house and you have to defend it, like something right out of Night of the Living Dead. And eventually you track down Mendez, the leader of the village, and you kill him. And that leads you to the castle. And Leon explores the castle and runs into his old frenemy, Ada Wong. You also meet this little midget villain known as Salazar.
I was starting to wonder when you might notice us.
Who are you?
Me llamo Ramon Salazar, the 8th Castellan of this magnificent architecture. I have been honored with the prodigious power from the great Lord Sadler. I've been expecting you, my brethren.
No thanks, bro.
And then you are also introduced to the Garrador, which is like a blind enemy, but it has very good hearing, so any noise will draw it to you. It has these giant claws. It can just chop your head off in an instant if you're not careful. It starts out as kind of like the boss fight, but eventually you run into multiple of these at the same time, and it's almost like a standard enemy before you're out of the castle. There's a fun detour here through a hedge maze, a ton of catapults that try to blow you up. There's also multiple sections where you split up with Ashley and then get reunited with her, and also a brief section where you control her when she's defenseless and just has to avoid enemies. Louis also ends up getting killed by Lord Sadler in this area.
Leon,
I miss Louis.
I got it.
There's another boss here you run into, the Verdugo. It involves a lot of quick time events that if you miss, you'll take some damage. It's possible to freeze and then kill it with a single rocket blast, and if you are very careful, you can actually find a free rocket in the castle area. Definitely suggest holding on to that for this fight. There's a brief sewer section where you fight these invisible bug-like creatures called Novistadors? I think that's how you say it. They're pretty annoying. You later go into an underground cave system, and you fight kind of a different variety of the same enemy. They don't go invisible, they're easier to kill, and they're really satisfying to blow up with the shotgun. You fight 2 El Gigantes at the same time. You go through a minecart level like something right out of Donkey Kong Country. You get chased by a giant, ridiculous statue of Salazar, and you eventually fight him directly. You eventually escape to a fortified island with the help of Ada Wong, who again leaves you. You fight some heavily armed infected in this area. You explore a wharf and a facility. This place is interesting because it really feels lived in. You see this kitchen and living space, and it's like how the infected are living their daily lives. Like, I want a sitcom around what these people do when they're not fighting Leon Kennedy. You're also introduced to a new enemy, the Regenerator, which is one of my favorite enemies in the entire series. You obtain this infrared scope, which you attach to the rifle, that lets you effectively kill them. You have to focus on these parasites that they're carrying on their body. You have to destroy all the parasites to blow them up, so you can't just brute force it. Though if you blast them with enough shotgun blasts, they will still die. You fight this really monstrous beast called the U3. Initially, it's this tense chase through like a maze system, and then there's a direct fight that takes just an incredible amount of ammo to finish him off. Eventually, you find your way to the ruins, where you meet up with your old comrade, Jack Krauser, who is believed to be dead. He's working with Ada at the direction of Wesker to secure samples of Las Plagas. You have a knife fight with him, and then he chases you through the ruins. He eventually kind of transforms, his arm becomes all monstrous, and he's kind of a pain in the ass. But you eventually do take him down, and you get to move on. There's also a really ridiculous bulldozer scene somewhere in here. I might be out of order. There's just so much that happens in this game. Ashley is abducted. You're reunited with her. This happens like so many times throughout the game, but you are eventually reunited for good. You find a way to remove the Las Plagas from you. You move on. You end up encountering Lord Sadler, who transforms into a giant creature. And you have one more moment with Ada Wong, who helps you take down Sadler, but also then betrays you and steals the sample. You do kill Lord Sadler after his transformation into the monster. You then ride away on jet skis, though there's this really annoying scene where you have to successfully escape the area on the jet skis, and it's really easy to die. Once you do, though, game's over. Beautiful ending. Sunset on the water. Ashley makes a pass at you. Leon is a gentleman. Doesn't go out with her. I think she's underage. That's kind of weird. So that's the main gist of the story. I mean, the game covers a huge amount of ground, and this is just a quick walkthrough. Really just skimming the surface. I could spend hours picking apart these locations in more detail, but let's keep moving. This is one of the longest games in the series, and definitely the longest up to this point chronologically. I really love this game, but I do feel like it drags a bit toward the end. It's a game that constantly wants to one-up itself. You remember how scary and difficult the El Gigante or the Chainsaw guys were? Well, how about we make you fight two at the same time? This game has so much action, and every time you think it can't get more ridiculous, you run into the next set piece that seems to take everything up another level. This is perhaps my only complaint. The game never really gives itself much time to breathe. I'd have preferred a few quiet, atmospheric moments where you're just exploring. Toward the end, these combat encounters come more frequently, and there's so many enemies that it can be a bit exhausting. Not a huge issue, as I find the combat really fun, and it really gives you an excuse to use all of the tools that the game provides, but the pacing is probably the only complaint I could make about the entire game. Now, the game has a ton of replay value beyond just the long campaign. This game has one of the best mercenary modes in any of the Resident Evil releases, and depending on the version you're playing, you may have access to Ada's campaign either separate ways or Assignment Ada Wong. The first being a full-length campaign showing what Ada's up to during the game, and the second is more of a mini-game. Perhaps the biggest draw here is the ability to replay the game in New Game Plus mode. This allows you to bring along all of your weapons and replay the campaign, finishing upgrading your weapons, unlocking everything, and boy is it satisfying to go back through the game with a Magnum right from the first village. And this really is the game that feels like it changed up the formula and introduced a ton of new mechanics. It's the first game that introduced fully upgrading your weapons. In some of the previous games you could get specific upgrades like the triple shot for your pistol or something, but here you could actually customize your weapons much more granularly than you ever could before, which is a staple of the later games in the series. It introduced the shopkeeper who will buy treasures from you and let you purchase weapon upgrades. It introduced the attaché case and the Tetris-like minigame, which, it's a lot more forgiving than previous games. Now you've got a separate inventory for your key items and your treasures. You've got a much bigger area, but there are so many new weapons and tools and ammo types that it feels like you're always on the cusp of being out of space, but it's not quite as frustrating as some of the earlier games in the series. You know, introduced enemies dropping resources and gold, and you know, it gives you an incentive to kill enemies rather than avoiding them, which I think, you know, I feel like the previous games, it really incentivized you avoiding combat when you can. But in this game, really, you want to kill everyone so you have enough gold to upgrade your weapons, to buy new weapons. It also expanded on the Mercenaries mode, which was introduced in Nemesis. And it gives just a huge amount of replay value. The Mercenary mode here is spectacular. I love it. It completely changed up the gameplay. Gone are the fixed camera angles, but rather now you have a more modern third-person camera with much more precise controls. Though the controls are still a bit tank-like, needing to hold a button to bring out your weapon and lacking the ability to sidestep, it still revolutionized the genre, and many third-person action games after this took inspiration and control in a similar manner. Looking at you, Dead Space. This is the game in the series that I think reinvented the formula, and most of the games after this are largely modeled after Resident Evil 4. That's not to say it's perfect. The game did lose some of the horror aspects. Since you're so much more capable now, some of the fear is gone, though the atmosphere is still largely retained. The feeling of foreboding and isolation in some of these areas is still quite strong. The music and sound effects harken back to those earlier games. And the game still does manage some frights, like the introduction of the regenerators, which I still think are the single scariest enemies in the entire game. Just the sound they make. It is frightening. Ashley can also be a bit annoying at times, though. In a bit more hectic moments, the game often allows you to direct her to safe spots out of the way. That's not to say that there weren't a few moments where she got captured or hit by a stray bullet. It left me annoyed. The puzzles are also largely taking a back seat here. Most are very simple, don't take much thought. If anything, it helps you get back into the action more quickly, but it feels like it is an aspect that is lost as the series progressed. The game's also very, very linear. I don't think there's ever a moment where it's unclear where you need to go next to progress. The story is very silly, even by Resident Evil standards, and Salazar straddles that line between fun and stupid, but overall I think it works, and it balances out the more serious moments of the game. This game did continue Leon's journey from a rookie cop to a seasoned globe-trotting special agent, and expands the role of Ada. It even lets you play her as a In Separate Ways campaign. You get to actually play a whole campaign as her, and get a lot more depth to that character. It expands the story, introducing new elements and factions that are referenced frequently in the future games. So, final thoughts. Overall, this is a top-tier Resident Evil game. One of the most influential games ever. And not just for later games in the Resident Evil series, but for video games in general. I think it's very close to perfect, and my only minor complaints are some small pacing issues, and the loss of some of the horror of the previous game. Which I think is largely made up for with the just incredibly fun gameplay loops. You fight enemies, you get money, you upgrade your weapons, you fight more enemies. Should you play this game today? I think this game is absolutely worth playing again. The remake is amazing as well and covers a lot of the same ground, but the tone and pacing are changed enough, and it's really worth exploring both of these games. The only reason I might suggest the remake is if you're just unwilling to deal with the less accommodating controls that were refined with the remake. In that case, you might find the VR version, if you have a Quest headset, might fix that for you. It is just a really fun way to play this, and it makes you feel like John Wick by the end. This is by far the game I've played the most in this series, and I don't see that changing over the next 2 decades, as I plan to play this game many more times, and just highly recommend it to everyone. So I'm going to end the video there. I do just really want to thank you for watching the series. If you've enjoyed this, drop me any comments with your thought on the game. Like, subscribe, all that jazz, and just have a great night, everybody.